I'm like 415 pounds, and I'm looking at my grandma who's 90, and I am less mobile than she is. I'm going to die before my grandma. What I'm here to say is if you want more, you have to act more. You have to contribute more. The world will tell you you really need to focus on one task, when actually you can focus on probably 2 or 3 tasks in a certain window of time. And that's going to give you the opportunity to live the 2 or 3 lives that you may need to live in order to be a successful person.
So, I don't know too much about you. So normally with my guests, I obviously ask all of my guests to provide a bit of background about their journey and their story and their life. And you gave me a piece there. And then what I also do is tend to look up anything I can find on them in terms of social media. Usually a lot of these people have stuff on YouTube that I can look at and kind of glean a little bit more information. But I don't know too much about you. So The only information I got was that you kind of went on a drastic weight loss journey, which is awesome.
Yep.
And, had this kind of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the way I perceived it was like a dead-end job that you were really unhappy in, and it led to depression. And now it's like tables have turned. You've got this really prestigious career and a really great company, right? So do you just want to shed some more light on like a really high level overview, because obviously we're going to dive into the weeds, but as a high level, what is your kind of journey and story so far?
Yeah, so I'm an American. I was raised in Colorado, which is kind of like a mountainous state in the western part of the United States. Really kind of normal family upbringing. Was considered one of those more gifted and talented students in school, which I think largely meant that I had some kind of learning disability that they didn't really know how to handle, and I was able to get good grades. And that sort of led me on a track of high expectations, which, is somewhat warranted when you're in school. You want kids to do well. You want, part of achieving is kind of visualizing that for yourself. But unfortunately, that came around the time of the Great Recession, economic crisis. And I was smart enough to get good grades, but I was not smart enough to get a full ride scholarship to university. And so when I went to my parents to be like, okay, guys, like, how are we paying for my education? They basically said, oh, we're not paying for your education. And that led me on a 5-year pretty self-destructive journey in terms of, overeating, essentially mentally permitting my underachievement and putting myself in a position where by the time I was 25, I weighed more than 400 pounds. I was cripplingly depressed, suicidal, and really feeling the weight of a lot of disappointment personally. And then also kind of stuck in this very internet-y loop of, hey, the best thing that you can do all day is just watch Netflix and YouTube. And that's really what your life is going to come to. You're just going to be a content enjoyer. Mm-hmm. And around that time, I had kind of a period where I did a lot of personal reflection. And one of those pieces of that was, it was my grandma's 90th birthday party. And we were up in the mountains. And I don't know if you've ever been high up in the mountains, but it's a lighter oxygen environment, which means it's harder to breathe. So I'm 415 pounds, and I'm looking at my grandma who's 90, who was a very small woman. I'm 6'5". She's probably at that point was 4'10", and I am less mobile than she is. I'm more sickly than she is. I'm less able to participate in activities than she is. I had this moment of I'm going to die, in a very I'm going to die before my grandma, sort of way. And my grandma, God bless her, 90 years old, still with us to this day, thank God. But she was raised in the Depression. Her youth was spent during World War II. She had a lot of really negative circumstances that impacted her. And it really kicked off this thinking for me of okay, why am I making these excuses for myself? Why am I pointing to myself and saying, hey, it's okay that you're underachieving? Why am I doing all of these, sort of typical behaviors that I think a lot of people who are depressed sort of experience, which is this kind of negative loop of you're never going to achieve and you're not achieving. And then from there, I kind of started going to therapy. I started working out more. I started sort of eating healthier. And I really got myself and worked myself to a point where I was learning so much and doing so much that I was able to achieve kind of everything that I thought that I should have in those previous 7 years in the following 3 years. to the point where I was able to sort of stack successes to the point where I was able to get a really great paying job where I was able to lose all that weight. I ended up doing a marathon and I ended up getting my master's degree and I ended up getting a really great career and starting a really great company. So I think kind of like what I'm here today is to kind of describe some of the ins and outs of that process, some of the things that I learned, and some hopefully tips for folks if they're out there struggling in a similar way to sort of see a way forward for themselves.
Perfect. It sounds similar to my whole shtick as well. So I'll just say, like, the reason that I'm doing this is I battled with depression and I was kind of searching for what I was specifically searching for was someone who had been through it and come out the other side. I wanted to hear how they did that, and I couldn't find it. And I can obviously tell my story, but my story is only so deep, and that's why I'm reaching out to, well, infinite people basically to hear all their stories and gather as many of those as I can. So that's really interesting. Can I ask, when your grandmother was 90 at the top of the mountain, how old were you then?
Mm-hmm. I was around 25, so 24, 25, I believe. Yeah, right around there.
How old are you
Maybe
now?
right before I turned 25. I'm 33.
Okay. How long was the
It was
journey?
about 3 years of a journey,
3 years.
and then kind of that I would say like, closing the door on or closing the depression window. Like really focusing on my mental health and recovering. And it was probably about 3 years of that, and then another 2 or 3 years of getting my life together to the point where I thought it would need to be. And now I'm excelling beyond where I even thought of, when I was a kid, because once you start developing those skills in terms of helping yourself mentally and then putting yourself back together, you realize like actually these are things that you can apply not only to those like repair activities, but also to future growth opportunities as well.
Sorry, you're reminding me a lot of myself because you're 33. I'm just trying to do the maths. So during lockdown, I would have been, I don't know, early 30s, let's say. And
Mm-hmm.
I guested on a podcast, much like you are now, telling my
Oh,
story
fun.
of how I went from, no education, no prospects, really depressed, dead end job. And now look at me, I'm working, I've got this really prestigious career and I've got a wife and kids and the cars. And it's just
It's
really
great.
interesting that it's like come full circle.
So you're late 30s now. Did it get better from your early 30s?
So from that point, I was like flying high. My career was like on a steady progression, making more money, far more money than I ever thought that I ever would be able to make. Got my dream car, several cars, my wife, my kids, and then this time last year, my partner had an affair,
Ah,
and she left me for her affair partner. So that's what triggered the whole depression thing. So that was
yeah,
definitely like the lowest point of my life. So
got
it
it.
kind of went like I thought I was up here at like my mid 30s, and then like mid 30s. So I was 35 when this happened. So I was went way down, and then over the last 12 months or more recently, the past 3 to 6 months, I've really come out the other side, and now I'm like higher than I ever was before. So and there's just a lot of things that are similar. So I was never 400 pounds. I think that's about, because I measure it in kilograms. I don't know why,
There you
but
go.
I think
No,
that's about 200, just under 200 kilograms.
a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. I was probably over. I was probably like 205 kilograms.
Okay, so I'm just trying to. So my highest was only 100 kilograms,
Gotcha.
and I remember then being. So as I say, I've got kids, and I remember getting to the end of the day and just being so tired and like out of breath. My resting heart rate was 120 BPM,
Yep.
and I hated that because I just thought I want to be able to run around with the kids and stick around. And I remember like it was an in joke with my friends that like with a resting heart rate of 120, I was going to die pretty soon. You were double that. So how
Oh
did
yeah.
you? What what
It
what
was a miserable. It was a miserable existence.
What did so obviously you've said what the kind of catalyst was, the thing that the switch that made you say like that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
What did it look like? What was day one of like time to sort this out?
I think that for me, what I thought when I was in my depression was there's going to be a magic bullet. There's going to be something that comes along. There's going to be a flip that switches. I would always say to myself, okay, I'm never eating overeating again. I'm never eating this again. I'm never doing that again. And that never worked. Probably, I think, more down the stretch, what I learned was, willpower requires a certain environment to exist, especially if you're talking about going cold turkey. I'd always kind of marveled at people who could quit things cold turkey, but I was not one of those people. So I needed a very like incremental approach. So it started with something as basic as two things. The first thing that I did was download a calorie tracking app, and I said, okay, I'm not going to reduce. I'm just going to track, like just to start. And what I found was that I was eating way more than I thought that I was.
Yeah.
I was actually kind of, I was like, why am I getting so fat? I was somewhere along the line, I had this like self perception of like, sure, I'm eating a lot, but I'm 6'5", I'm relatively young. Like I should be able to burn this off. And then I start looking through and I'm like, oh my God, like if you eat this many M&Ms, that's that many calories. If you eat 2 pizzas a day and, four, M&M bags and 2 ice creams, like this is how much is in it. And I had, like, there was something about what I was doing to myself. Like there was some incentive that I had to not understand what I was doing. I didn't have like it wasn't giving that feedback loop of like you're eating too much. That wasn't being provided to me. And I so the first thing to do was like gather information from a basic app. And so I would say if anybody's kind of like wondering like why am I not able to lose weight? Like a good way to do it is just to start tracking your calories and then pinpointing, hey, maybe instead of 4 bags of M&Ms a day, you just eat 3 this week. Or maybe, instead of 2 pizzas, you eat 1.5. That's a start. That's a start. That's a progression. And the other thing that I did was, and this is like slightly embarrassing to admit, but we're here to be real. I would go to the mall and I liked the local mall that we had was nice. It kind of smelled like Cinnabon, so a fat guy could kind of be a little comfortable. And I would just walk around the mall with like the grannies. And it wasn't like I wasn't in that place where I was really able to go to the gym and feel comfortable there yet. That would take a little bit of time.
Yeah.
Both physically and just mentally. But I was able to get out and do some exercise and again like an incremental step that helped me to see like, oh no, like outside in the real world, you can see families walking around together. You can see people buying things. You can see, workers doing work. Like people are contributing in ways that you're probably not considering. And that was helpful from a mental and a physical perspective. So really incremental steps to start.
Yeah, the calorie thing is something that I had to learn the hard way as well. So for the longest time, I was exactly the same as you. I was like, I'm not eating that much. I'm probably,
Right.
you guess it, right? It's the opposite of an educated guess. It's an uneducated
Yep.
guess because you don't know how much things cost in terms of calories. So you say, yeah, I eat that for breakfast and then I'll have that for dinner. Okay, maybe I shouldn't have a pizza for dinner, but it's not that much. And it's only when you start scanning it into the apps that you're like, holy
Yep.
shit, I'm like way over my calories.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no. And that's you can exercise your way out of a bad diet, but only to a certain extent, unless you're, over here we have our version of football players, over there you have your version of football players. Unless you're kind of doing that level of exercise every day where you're running and jumping and kicking and flipping and doing everything that they do, you're not going to be able to maintain a loose diet. And I think it kind of makes sense. Like we live in a world where food is abundant, right? Like for most of our history, the question is not like, well, how much am I eating? It's when am I going to be able to get enough to eat? And, especially here in America, like there's a very permissive food culture around like, the portion is supposed to be bigger than your face. It's supposed to be big enough for a family of 4 for one. Like that's what it's supposed to be. That's the value over here. And so like that's kind of like the way it is. So you kind of become integrated into that culture and without any sort of guardrail internally, you can pretty easily go overboard.
Yeah. You also mentioned being comfortable in the gym. That's another
Yep.
thing that put me off for so long. And as I say, I was never super overweight. I've always had a belly, but even that put me off going to the gym
Yep.
because you'd go in there and it was just buff guys everywhere, and you would think
Yep.
that everyone's going to be staring at you. And I've done like 10 years of on and off gymming, but it's only this past year or two that I signed up to a really small independent gym that's 24/7, and they do classes. So outside of the classes, that's when I go because I know there'll be no one there. And it's the longest stint that I've done at the gym, and I go like 5-6 times a week, and I love
That's
it
perfect.
because there's no there's no uncomfortableness.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like if I could go back and tell myself one thing, well, I tell myself many things, but one thing I would tell myself is like you feel way more self-conscious about going to the gym than anybody at the gym is going to feel for you being there. Like
Yeah,
you're bigger, you know that. Like your shirt may ride up a little bit, your shorts may sag down a little bit. Nobody cares. Just, they're really focused on their thing and they may have some friends and there may be some classes and stuff, but don't give yourself that excuse to say like, oh, I'm going to be super self-conscious. I completely get it as someone who was there. I actually going back into the gym was I had a girl that I was into at the time, and so she was like, hey, I do this class, and I was like, okay, like I'm going to that class. And I found that I really started loving it. It was a high intensity workout course for like 60
yeah,
minutes, and I got my ass kicked, but it was really I enjoyed the feeling of being around people who were so intense in their exercise. Like there was no opportunity for them to look to the left or the right at me because like it was so intense that they couldn't do that. And that was a really great like next step out of like the mall walking phase into more like rigorous exercise because it was like, okay, first of all, it's a class, so everything is kind of set up. There's a little bit more rigid structure. You kind of know what you're supposed to do. But then also you're going because you want to, say hi to this girl. There's an added incentive there. But if you're not in that type of a situation, I would say like take it from me, folks. If you get some asshole coming up to you and talking about what you look like or what you're doing in the gym, and it's not related to like, hey, you're destroying the equipment, then go tell the gym staff, and they'll kick that guy out of the gym 90 to 99% of the time, because that's just not really how gyms work. At gyms, you're supposed to be focused. You're supposed to be, doing what they're there to do. And yeah, there are going to be people who look better than you. That's good. There's always going to be people who look better than you in the world. That's a part of life. We all have to accept that. But keep going. It doesn't matter. It's not a runway. This is not the Vegas Strip or something where you have to wear your best outfit and go walking around showing yourself off. Like this is a gym. Go in there and to improve yourself.
yeah. I think it's definitely more an internal thing that we think people are going to judge us, but actually, I harp on a lot about the negatives of social media, but actually, I get a lot of gym or workout or health and fitness stuffs on my YouTube algorithm, and a lot of it is those people who went from crazy fat, like morbidly obese, and then it shows them now and they're just in crazy shape, and
Yep.
that's super admirable. And I think, well, I can only speak for myself, but when I see someone who's out of shape, even in the beginning steps, like I'll do my walk every day, and if I see someone who's overweight out there walking or running, I really admire them. It's like I
Yep.
can see that you're only just beginning, and I hope you stick with it. But just the fact that you're conscientious enough to make a start and try it, like that's super admirable.
I completely agree. I think putting yourself in environments where exercising is seen as a community thing is also really good. Classes are really good at that. I also got into 5Ks pretty early on, like running little races, like neighborhood races and little
Oh
stuff.
yeah,
And you get a little t shirt, a little medal, you get a bottle of water, and you're not going to be the last person, no matter how like fat you are, because there's always going to be someone slower than you at those races. At my 415 pounds, like I was still not the last person to cross that line. So, even if you don't run the whole thing, pushing yourself a little bit, and you could do one of those each month and seek pretty consistent improvement as you hone in the diet side and continue the exercise courses and stuff like that. But yeah, that's a lot of exercise culture is very individualistic, which is good in some senses. But one of the harms of it is people can kind of feel like because they don't fit the profile, they should not participate. And I think there are plenty of opportunities where, hey, if you don't fit the profile, you can participate. And if you kind of let your self consciousness, your ego go a little bit, you can actually have a good time and feel really accomplished after I would go with my sister and my mom fairly frequently to these 5K events. And our thing was, oh, we did a 5K. There's nothing else we can do for the rest of the day but nap. Because that was like our thing that we did, like our sense of accomplishment. So, oh no, don't ask me to do any chores today. I did a 5K. I've done a lot today. I'm just going to go home and nap. So that was our thing that our little joke that we had, and it was fun. It's a good experience and something that I think could really help folks as they're getting back out there.
Did you just jump straight into the 5Ks, or did you like prep yourself for it?
Actually, you know what? I think it was we. I had a coworker. No, this must have been before that. I think I think I got my family to go with me. I didn't really prepare myself because I knew like I wasn't going to be able to do a 5K, right?
Hmm.
But there was something about it, just participating in it, that made me want to try it. And I think one of the things is I was like in therapy and coming out of like the depression, the more mental depression, was giving more permission to more off the wall ideas. So if something felt like, hey, this isn't something I would normally do, but it might be good for me, that's an automatic yes, where it was probably a no before. And so 5K was like, okay, I don't know how well I'm going to do. I don't know what's going to happen. I could injure myself, like all these things, you go through your head, or I could look weird or whatever. But just go out there and try it. And it really, worked for me.
And what did that look like? Because at 400 pounds, was it
It
just
looked like
a
a lot of
5K
walking.
walk?
So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, pretty much. Well, and so what I would do is there's a hard part of it, right? Because when you're really big and you first start exercising, you feel bad about yourself because
Mm.
you're like, I'm so fat, I can't do X, Y, and Z, and that's really embarrassing, and it's really gross, and it's this feeling of like you let yourself go. It's not dissimilar, I would imagine, from someone who's coming off like hard drugs or alcoholism, similar to like, hey, I really beat myself up. I really let myself go. I haven't been there for myself as much as I like should have been or needed to be. When you're doing a 5K, like all that stuff comes rushing in, and you have this experience of like, oh man. But what I started to do was, okay, as soon as I see the finish line, I'm going to do my best version of running until I can get through to the end of the race. And then over the course of time, and I'm talking about like 2 years, that, okay, I'm, a quarter or an eighth of the mile to the way. I'm gonna run that last part. Oh, I'm, halfway through. I'm gonna run this part. Like the as I started losing weight and getting in better shape, the period of time where I would walk got shorter and shorter, and the period of time if I would run, it got longer and longer. And obviously there was a little bit of like start stop there, right? If you're not feeling it, or maybe you feel like, hey, I'm really worn out, or I may have an injury or something like that, like it changes. But I think as I did more and more of them, I was able to kind of run more and walk less. But yeah, a lot of walking in the beginning, which is fine. That's what it's supposed to be. You're not out
Hmm.
here. The thing about with a 5K, similar to the gym, you have to work really hard to be the strongest guy in the gym if there's like 100 people in the gym usually, and you have to be really really fast if you're going to win the 5K when there's like 200 people in the 5K, because those are professional or semi-professional or amateur racers who, especially in Denver, Colorado, which has some of the healthiest people in the United States, like they're extremely fit, extremely fast, and you're not going to beat them even if you're people with good body fat percentages are not going to beat them. So it's a good, again, like permissive environment to be like, okay, what does success look like for you? What does that mean to you?
Do you still run now?
I do, not as much as I used to. So I went from 5Ks to 10Ks, and then I went to 13Ks, and then I did a marathon. And after that, I kind of slowed down a little bit on the running side. My knees started to have a little bit of wear and tear on them. And we'll kind of probably get into this a little bit more later, but the dieting portion of what I was doing was hurting me more than it was helping me. And so I had to kind of adjust and relearn and focus on like, okay, what does health look like rather than just weight loss?
Hmm.
And part of that was slowing down a little bit on the running. But right now, I would say I'm not doing as much running as I used to. It's kind of funny. We were looking at 5Ks to go on, and I live in San Francisco now, and the entry fees for 5Ks out here are like 4 times more expensive than Colorado. So I'm having a hard time like incentivizing myself to get back into that. But it comes in spurts and waves based on work availability and all that stuff. But yeah.
Marathon is one hell of a leap from 5K. Did you run the whole thing?
I ran for most of it. I made a bad mistake and let myself walk for, so it's 26 miles.
Yeah.
So I ran mile 1 to 17 and then I walked 17 to 19 and that killed me for the rest of the race. And I
Oh,
did end up running, but I was like in some serious pain through the rest of the race cuz your body, number one, you're not really meant to go 26 miles on a single run. Like it's pretty crazy. People can do it, but they're freaks. And the other thing is, your joints and everything, like they just kind of seize up. But I actually witnessed a health incident on the side of the road at mile 17. Like this guy basically like had this massive contraction, I guess like a Charlie horse. I don't know if you're familiar with what
yeah.
that means, but it just basically you could see his thigh just like rippling, like it was like crazy. So we had to help him out a little bit with that, and then I also went from Colorado, which is one of the driest states in the country in terms of atmospheric moisture, to Florida, which is one of the wettest. And it got really hot and muggy, and so I was not ready for those conditions. And I think I do want to do another one here in probably in the next couple of years, and I would train differently
Hmm.
for the marathon. But yeah, it was. So I started doing 5Ks probably a year after I started losing weight, and then I did about 2 years of that, and then about 2 more years of training before I did a marathon.
Okay. So over here, we've got something. Well, I mean, you'll have access to it over there, but I think it's a British thing because it's recommended by the NHS called Couch to 5K.
Mm.
So have you heard of that?
I have, yeah. It's an
Okay.
app, right? I think
Yeah.
I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's
Yep.
what I did. I used to run
Fun.
5Ks all my whole life. I hated running, but I wanted to get into it, and I was like couch to 5K, and this was 2021, so coming out of lockdown.
Yep.
And the 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 appeal was the fact that it starts off with, so it's always half an hour. Your run is always half an hour, but it starts off in week one with walk for 90 seconds, run for 30, and it just
Yep.
does that for half an hour. And I was like, I can run for 30 seconds. That's fine.
Right.
And then yeah, you slowly work your way up, and it's a 9 week program. By the time you're at week 9, you're running half an hour, 5K non-stop,
That's great. That's
and
awesome.
I loved it. After that, I loved running, and I would run a
Yep.
5K every other day. So I gave myself a day rest in between, and I would slowly increment the space, the distance, so 6K, 7K, 8, and I was
Fun.
aiming for 10K because I just loved running so much. But same as you, I got injuries. I've got
Yep.
my knees are fucked. My hip, for some reason, I think it's connected because I see a physio about my knees, and she says it's to do with my hip strength. But I
Yep.
noticed that after each 5K run, my hip would click every step
Yep.
that I took, and I had to take a couple of days off to recover from that. So then I was like, fuck it, I'm just going to stop running. So I don't really
Yeah.
do any cardio anymore. I just do weightlifting. But the another thing you spoke about is something I want to talk about how you realized it's not just about eating less and losing fat, but it's also about the health. And that's another thing that the calorie counter that the tracking app is really good for because it tracks your macros. So
Yep.
step one is counting your calories and being like, oh,
Yep.
okay, this equals this many calories. Like a slice of bread is 100, and then you don't have to religiously use it. Once you have a base understanding of how much things cost in terms of calories, you can
Mm-hmm.
kind of work off of that. But then going from that, the next thing I learned is the macros, because you could be like,
Yep.
oh, I've done my 1800 calories today, but if it's all pasta and bread, you've gone way
Yep.
over on your carbs and you're way under on your
Yep.
protein, and you're
Yep.
just going to get fat again. So now are you
Yep.
tracking your macros as well? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I would say at a certain point in time, I was like one of the most obsessed people with macros and the science of macros, because if you dig into it, there's a lot of like contradictory information,
Okay.
especially for someone who is like my size, like being 6'5", and in the way that I'm like particularly built, there's really not like, I'm an outlier, just just for height. So
Yeah.
looking at like, okay, what do men need versus what women need, and then looking at the individual ways that that works, and it is actually pretty fascinating. Like, okay, so what is a protein, and why do you need a certain amount of it? What is a fat, and why do you need a certain amount of it? and why are there like four fat and the way that the different grams work together. I don't remember exactly correctly, but I think it takes 2 fat grams to make a calorie, something like that, and four. Someone in the chat, I'm sure will correct this, but there's a certain gram count to calorie, and fat has a little bit more of it, which is why you actually need a little bit less of it compared to the carbs and the proteins.
Okay.
And then you find a protein bar that has like your perfect like dialed in scale of macros, which for me it was 2 to 1. So I wanted 2 proteins, 2 carbs to 1 fat. And then they change the formulation, and you get to go on the internet forums and rail with everybody else and be like, how dare they do this? But yeah, the macro stuff is such a big deal. And I think that as like you said, as soon as you track the calories, as soon as you have a feel for tracking the calories, and it becomes more instinctual than needing the app, getting the macros really dialed in and really figuring out also like times of day that are best to eat, types of food that are best to eat. There's a lot of you can have a lot of like red meat in certain things, but how does that make you feel after a run compared to salmon? You could have a lot of bread, but how does that make you feel after a run compared to rice? And like there's a lot of like different ways in sort of things that work out, especially when you're training for like a marathon type activity that really puts you really begin to scrutinize everything that you're eating. And I think honestly, I kind of went overboard with it to that end. I kind of like went to like this crazy, like I would never eat anything other than what I had, my macros, diary essentially told me to. And I think, at a certain point that became less helpful. But, it's also part of the fun of feeling like you're training like an athlete, which is like, hey, I'm going to eat this brown rice and broccoli and fat-free Greek yogurt. That was one thing that I ate with my protein powder and salmon. Like that was it. Like that's all that I ate. And it was great for, a window of time. But yeah, it took, I had to learn after that how to eat more sustainably. But yeah.
Yeah. So what I did over the years was, again, with absolutely no education or information, I was just like, what's healthy? Broccoli, brown rice, chicken, that'll do. And I would just eat that all the time. And it's better than pizzas, but it's not sustainable. Like you eat that twice a day and you're like, fuck that. I'm so bored of that. And my problem is outside of work and the kids and the podcast, I have very, very limited time. So I didn't have time for meal prep, and what I found was I'd buy all the ingredients, I'd plan everything to the gram and the macro. This is what I'm gonna cook for my meal prep, but then I wouldn't have time to prep it. So then when it came to meal time and I was starving and I didn't have anything prepped, that's when I would fall off the wagon. So I subscribed to one of those overly expensive subscription meal things. And I've been on that for a year now, and it is expensive, but I haven't fallen off the wagon because of it. They're microwave meals, they're high protein, low carb, low fat, and I've always got a meal ready. But yeah, you're right about the kind of contradictory information, and also the fact that everyone's got an opinion. So I was, towards the end of last year, I was seeing this girl who had done a really dramatic weight loss, and she actually wrote a book on, I'm trying to think about exactly what it was. It was around kind of weight loss and fat loss, but how you shouldn't necessarily listen to everything everyone's telling you. There's a lot of nuance to it. And one of the things she told me, which I started doing and then my PT told me to stop doing, was what I was having for breakfast, for example, was 3 eggs and like 250 grams of 2% fat lean beef mince and 1 piece of brown toast. And a lot of people are put off by mince in the morning, mince with eggs, but it's good protein. And I told her I was doing that, and she said, you should replace the beef mince with bacon. And I was like, that sounds bad, because bacon's high in fat. And then she bamboozled me with a bunch of facts and figures, and I was like, okay. And I did it for a few weeks, and then I told my trainer, and he was like, I wouldn't. I'd go back to the beef mince.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. Everyone's got an opinion, right? Like, what does your diet look like, for example?
So I think so. Currently, actually, I do something relatively similar to you. So we have in the morning. I'm not the biggest breakfast guy, especially since I stopped doing running training because I have pretty busy mornings with my job. So I usually will get up and just do a cup of coffee, which speaks a little bit to the unhealthiness of, currently what I'm doing. I'm definitely not in like athlete mode right now. So if you're watching this and wondering, hey, should I not eat breakfast? No, you should probably eat breakfast. Most people should eat breakfast. I should probably be eating breakfast. It's smart. At our at my work, we have a cafe which has a like really nice, vegetable meal option with a like well prepared fish or meat. Usually it's not a red meat, though sometimes it is. Fish is really good. And then I also have like a meal kit service that I use. And I like to cook, so we'll do that in the evening. And that's usually they'll send you two that are fairly healthy and two that are not so healthy. And then you just on those days where you're not eating the healthy ones, hey, maybe get a workout in or something on those days. But I think one of the things that really helped me was everybody has an opinion. Opinions are like assholes. Everybody has one, and that's great. And people are generally trying to help when they
Yeah.
offer their opinion. But the real question is, how does it feel to you? And I think the physiological aspect of our diet is not something that we oftentimes think about. We think about kind of weight effects, energy level, but also there's just this like feeling of like, okay, when I eat a portion of bacon versus a portion of steak, how does that make me feel? How does it make me feel when I don't eat breakfast versus when I do eat breakfast? And I did a lot of different kinds of diets. I did veganism for a few months. I did Whole 30, if you're familiar with that, for a few months.
What's that one?
I
Oh,
did
just like Whole
Whole
Foods.
30 is it's kind of like it's kind of like paleo, but with a few less things that you can eat. So
Right.
basically it's all whole foods. That's the
Hmm.
intention. No preservatives, no added sugar, which is really great. I do it
Yeah.
infrequent. I do it. I try to do it at least once a year now, because it really resets your taste buds in terms of sugar. Especially here in America, like everything just has added sugar as a preservative. And when you do this diet and you don't eat any sugar and you start like tasting food, you're like, oh, sugar isn't everything. But yeah, I think it's good that when people start offering you feedback, which is a part of like getting healthy, that is good to have like a community that can kind of help advise you. Uh, some of that stuff is just not going to work for you, and God bless those people for trying to help you, but also like at the end of the day, you kind of have to know what works for you. Oh, a good way to do that is experimentation.
Yeah. When I signed up for this gym that I'm with, and the trainer, so the trainer gives you a personalized nutrition plans for all the clients. And when you first start, he gives you three options for breakfast. And he says, day one, try this one. Day two, try this one. Day three, try this one. And make a note of how it makes you feel. And I can't remember exactly what it is, but the first one is a bit more carb. Second one's a bit more fat. Third one's a bit more protein. And yeah, I remember distinctly like having the first one, and I felt sick. Like I couldn't finish it. There was loads of fruit. It sounded
Mm-hmm.
really good. It was like yogurt and fruit, and I was like, sounds amazing, but it was a lot, and it just made me feel sick. So yeah, experimentation, and yeah, as you say, how stuff makes you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like carbs, if you eat a heavy carb meal, it tastes really good, but afterwards you just feel sluggish and bloated. Especially, you'll actually know far more than me on this, kind of the science behind it in terms of when to eat. You said earlier there's a lot in terms of when you eat during the day. So what I found was I did a really decent kind of weight loss couple of weeks, let's say, because we've got a body composition machine at the gym, and
Cool.
had that kind of check in with my PT coming up, and I was on a steady decline in terms of weight or fat. And the night before, the night before my weigh-in, I ate like something. It was a cheat meal, like a pizza or a pasta or something. It was high
Mm-hmm.
carb, and then the next day, I just looked bloated and fat, and I weighed in, and it wasn't. It didn't say what I wanted it to say, and I was like, "What? Why?" And he was like, "If you eat carbs, it bloats you, it absorbs all the water, it
Mm-hmm.
inflates your weight, and
Yep.
that'll take a few days for that to burn off again."
Yep. Yep. I tell folks like if you're doing a weight loss weight loss is really best described in terms of like change over a course of time, because what we eat can so dramatically affect our weight, especially if we're tracking to like the pound or the inch. Like if you eat a salty, bunch of salty peanuts right before you do a weigh-in and you drink a big glass of water, you're going to weigh more than if you hadn't done that, right? And it has nothing to do with your overall lifestyle or your overall health. But yeah, I got like religiously good. So the times that I would eat when I was really focused on weight loss was I would eat heavy on carbs in the morning and then heavy on fats in the noon. And then for the dinner meal, I would be heavy on protein. And the reason was because I wanted to lose the most weight while I was asleep or I was exercising. So I wanted to wake up hungry pretty much every single day. That was like what my goal was. So if you eat those proteins, you're going to go to bed feeling really satiated. At least I did. And that was something that I had a hard time with at the beginning. Like losing weight was like I couldn't sleep very well because I was hungry or feeling that feeling of hunger. So I had to, what I did was, okay, we're going to, lots of meats, they get, they expand and they do all that stuff they do in your tummy and it feels really good and you go to bed. But when you wake up, you've burned through a lot of that stuff because it's not very calorically dense. So you eat that big load of carbs. So you're satiating all of your panicking internal instrumentation, which is saying like, we're starving, we're starving, we're starving. Nope, we're going to hit you with fruits, grains, maybe some vegetables or, even a fat or two to kind of regulate the hormones. And then when we get to lunch, we may have worked out or, we may be dealing with the stress of the day. So that's when we're going to eat our fats. We're going to hit our nuts. We're going to hit our, more fatty foods that we like to eat. And then, that's actually can be pretty decent energy for the rest of the day as well to get to that evening meal with the proteins. But yeah, that's kind of like the thing that I did because that made me feel the best. It was like, okay, I still want to lose weight, but I don't want to feel, I would get pretty angry. Like I would get hangry pretty often because I was essentially like withdrawing from, 3 pizzas a day. And when you do that, like it's a lot on your body, like it's taxing. And I think when you're losing weight, like your body goes into a little bit of a panic mode because you're not supposed to lose weight. Like you're not supposed to do that. Your body wants you to be fat in a lot of senses because when you get fat, it really pleases you. It makes your body think that it's being successful because, you're storing up nutrients and you're protecting yourself. And it's not until you deal with some of the effects of that, whether it be like, cardiac issues or other sort of health related things further on down the road, but that takes some time because our bodies do want us to, pack on fats in some senses. So when you lose it, your body starts to panic. And so it's really like talking to your body, figuring out, hey, how can I make you feel like we're comfortable, we're okay, we're not gonna, we're not gonna lose, this is a good thing that we're doing for ourselves. And I think, one way to do that is to have a really effective meal plan that works for you.
Yeah, I heard that the reason we kind of crave bad food, high carb, high fat, is because, our ancestors would not have as much resources as we do today. So whenever we did have a high calorie meal, our body would be like, yes, we don't know where the next one's coming. We need to eat as much of this as possible so that we can store it. And that's the problem.
Yep.
Now we've got so much food. We've got the stores on every corner, and we can eat a massive pizza, and our body says, yes, more of this, store it, store it, store it, and we eat it. And then when does it stop?
Yep. Well, it's interesting. So my family background is Irish, and so we came to America off of the Great Potato Famine because a lot of people in our family were starving, like literally could not sustain themselves. And it's so weird to be here in America where it's like I live right across the street from a grocery store. I'm about as far away from starving as anybody in the history of the world. And my grandpa his dad was 5'10", he was 6 foot. My dad was 6'3", and I'm 6'5". So we live in this environment where like food is so readily available that literally like we are exploding in terms of height. Like we're reaching this like super, potential as humans, whatever you want to say. But then another part of that is like I'm probably, or I was at a certain point, like way fatter than like probably my whole family tree combined. If you put body fat weights, I'm probably going back pretty far in terms of where I was compared to where all of they were. So, yeah, we do live in this environment where it's like food is everywhere and our bodies don't really know how to handle that. And I think, it's going to be really interesting to see in a few years when people look at like DoorDash and Uber Eats and like the way that food is just so readily accessible and the way that it's advertised to us oftentimes focuses on the least healthy things, which makes sense because that's what people want to eat. That's probably what they pay the most for. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, if the problem is now overconsumption of food products, like how do we ensure that we're helping people if it's their chemistry that's going against them rather than just, the the environment.
Yeah. Where do you stand on cheat meals?
I found as I got healthier, cheat meals became a way to justify binging behavior.
Okay.
And at a certain point, they were no longer helpful for me. So at the beginning, it felt pretty good to just not worry. And I would say, so as I'm getting down, my hardest terms in sort of weight loss was 420, 415 to like 390, the first leg. And then I dropped 390 to 320 like it was nothing. And then 320 to 290 was really tough. And that's where I had to let go of cheat meals because I was basically using it as a way to sort of stay connected to those old behaviors
Mm.
where it was like I was basically inducing myself. It's kind of like I don't really I don't love connecting it to other like addictive behaviors because I just don't know enough about like how addiction works to speak. Alcoholism is something that's really been studied and gone over a lot, and so is drug addiction. Food addiction and how I experienced it was a very similar sort of behavior of like, okay, I'm not going to have one drink except for this one night a day, and then it would turn into like 2 days of drinking. And so it's like at a certain point you realize like, okay, this cheat mentality. And honestly, like being from a religious background, this idea of like, ooh, you're cheating, like you're engaging in some sort of deviant behavior that is, going against you wasn't really a helpful thing just mentally to carry forward.
Hmm.
And so eventually I went away from it. I would not look down on anybody who does the cheat meal thing. I think it's probably a little bit played out. I also look at the people who like when I was looking on YouTube, the people who publicized it the most were like weightlifters who did a lot of exercise and a lot of weightlifting and needed that sort of caloric boost to put themselves in a healthier place. Like Dwayne Johnson, that was the big cheat meal guy that I saw. And his stuff was crazy, but most of us aren't doing Dwayne Johnson levels of work. So we probably don't need to do that. But on the other hand, if you need like an outlet for a treat or something, like I completely understand that and definitely wouldn't look down on anybody who did it. It just didn't really work for me.
That's another thing where you need, or at least I found that I needed education on it as well, because I've been through the ringer in terms of cheat meals. So up here on my bookshelf, I've got Russell Brand's Recovery, which is all about addiction. So I'm similar to you, that where I don't like likening food addiction to other substance abuse, substance addictions, because I don't know anything about it. So I don't like to say that I'm addicted to food. It sounds a bit victim mentality.
Right.
But I've always struggled with overeating and binge eating, and I used that book a couple of times to help with that. But the thing with that is that's basically the 12 steps from AA, but you can apply it to anything. So that means you take the behavior and you never, ever, ever do it again for the rest of your life. So that means no cheat meals. But then you've also got people who say a cheat meal, like once a week, keeps you on the path. Because if you just go cold turkey, never, ever, ever again, you're going to always crave it, always want it, put it on a pedestal, and then you're going to fall off the wagon. But you can go too far. So I was once, I'm like you, I've tried all the different diets. And there was one that I did called Second Nature, which is prescribed by the NHS over here in the UK, which is basically Atkins. It's low carb dieting. It's replacing potatoes with cauliflower, I found a lot of the time. And you get assigned a coach who helps you whenever you're kind of faltering. And I said to her, oh, I had a cheat meal this week. And she said, the way I see it is 7 days a week, 3 meals a day, you've got 21 meals. Even if you had 3 cheat meals, that's still 18 good meals and 3 bad meals. It's not that bad. And then I took that as, 3 cheat meals is okay. And then that's actually not okay. But what I only very recently found the past few months is I would stick religiously to my caloric deficit 6 days a week, and then 1 day a week I would splurge and I would binge eat and I would get absolutely anything I wanted. And then it was only when I started counting the calories that I was like, oh, I'm saving up like a several thousand calorie deficit in a week, and then I'm eating that again. So
Yep.
now I'm not in a deficit at all. So then what
Yep.
I had to do was change my cheat meal from a McDonald's lunch and a Domino's dinner to just like a, I don't know, like a chicken wrap with
Mm.
loads of mayo, and like that'll be like a white tortilla wrap, whereas normally I wouldn't eat that because it's quite high in carbs. Battered or breaded chicken, typically don't eat that because it's processed and it's not lean. Mayo, like fat, there's a lot of fat in mayo. All those kind of things which you typically tend to avoid. It's still a nice treat, and it's a little higher in calories than you should be eating, but as a
Yep.
weekly treat, it's not going to burn through your calorie deficit. So that's what I'm trying to do now.
And I think that's speaks to like the process of learning. Like it's kind of like you were talking about like couch to 5K.
Hmm.
You're not also not going to go from like terrible diet to perfect diet. There's a lot of steps and stages. And I think a good thing for folks to remember is the role of satiation. Like you're talking about, if I bet if you laid out that wrap, like, very clinically went through and said, I really like this mayo because it gives me like that fatty feeling in my mouth, or I really like the friedness of the chicken or whatever, whatever element that you walk through with that, it's going to give you certain things that help you mentally stay in the game of your diet. And over time, those things can be replaced by other things that might be more healthy. There's also another like angle of convenience as well. Dieting, like you said before, requires a lot of preparation, a lot of work, really. Like, not only do you have to like learn about all this stuff, but you have to apply it, and then you have to like actually buy the food, cook the food, all that stuff. So sometimes, that cheat meal or that, satiation experience can really be about like, hey, I don't have a bunch of time. I don't want to have to spend a bunch of time researching and cooking and everything. I just want a nice thing that makes me feel full.
Yeah.
That could be a helpful element and way to look at it.
And another thing that you mentioned, and this is interesting because you're 6'5", so BMI is something
Yeah.
that we very, or beginners, I should say, like people who are new to weight loss, what they do is they go onto Google and they say, how do I lose weight? And the first step is calculate how overweight you are. And unfortunately, that's typically done by BMI. And I don't
Yep.
really understand why. But you plug in your numbers and it says you're overweight. And it's like, well, I mean, like you were saying, the American football players, right? Like the defensive line of an American football team are all really fat, but they're also running a lot, and
Yep.
they work out a lot. And someone such as yourself who's 6'5", I bet if you plugged your numbers into there, it'd say you're overweight or obese, even when you weren't.
Yep. Yeah, I think so. I went from 420 to at my lightest, I was like 198, and I was like just under the overweight category at that point. And I felt terrible. Like I felt like emaciated. I felt sick.
Wow.
I was not, my experience of that weight was not fun for me because I felt really good, like 230 to 220, 210, a little bit light, but still feeling good. But by 198, I was just feeling really weak. And that could speak to how I was eating. There's a number of contributing factors. But the BMI is intended, like with most metrics, like it's intended to represent an average.
Yeah.
And so on that, like if you're someone who the parameters, which is like age, height, all that stuff, is not, if you're not a part of that category, if you're not in the average of that, you're going to find yourself experiencing some things that you probably didn't anticipate experiencing. Like they were telling me like, oh, you need to get down to like 160. I'm like 160. Like I was like at like, 6% body fat at 198. And so I was like, I can't, like physically, I just can't do that. And then you learn about, not all bodies are composed the same way. Like
Hmm.
I have more of like what's called like a swimmer's body where my torso is actually really long. My legs are about the same length as like an average height person's, but my torso is really long. And that's going to really change, your bone structure and how that affects your body. Another thing that people, don't really like talking about as much is I had a lot of like excess skin because I was 400 pounds. And
Hmm.
so, in order to achieve my healthy BMI, I probably would have to go under the knife and remove some of that skin. Was that something that I really wanted to do? Like, was I willing to go like that far to fit the metric? And I think towards the end of like my weight loss journey, there was this I think I slipped back into a depression probably a little bit, which was like, okay, all these numbers and these metrics and these ideas that I had about weight loss and arriving at like this perfect body for me probably was not going to match what I had imagined, especially at the very beginning. I was anticipating like, okay, once you get skinny, you're gonna look like Captain America. You're gonna be able to run through a wall, and you're going to, you're gonna have like a perfect life. Like that's it. That's all. That's what I was doing it for. And so when I arrived there, and I looked great, I looked fine. I looked a lot better, obviously, than 400. I was feeling a lot better, a lot more physically active, a lot more healthy. But I wasn't looking like Captain America. I was definitely not able to run through a wall, and my life was still not where I wanted it to be. I would say like I didn't have a lot of body dysmorphia when I was 400 pounds because I kind of like had accepted that version of myself. Like I was like, this is what it is. But when I got to a skinnier self, I started experiencing a lot more like body dysmorphia and criticism of myself because I didn't know how to handle not being what I thought I was going to be at the end of the weight loss part of the journey.
So now we can, I guess, migrate over from the external to the internal. So you mentioned you did therapy at kind of you started therapy at the height of your kind of depression, I guess, and that presumably would have been at the height of your weight as well, right?
Yeah, I actually started therapy. I went to two therapists before I found one that clicked with me. So I probably started it like 6 to 9 months before because I
Hmm.
spent 6 to 9 months with those other therapists and it wasn't a great experience. But then I found someone that I really like felt like I could work with, and that's really where a lot of the like I think and it's similar into the way that I didn't know like I was so overweight and unhealthy. Mentally I didn't understand how unhealthy I was. Like I knew I was suicidal. I knew that I hated myself to some extent. I knew I had a lot of problems, but I didn't I wasn't processing the effect that that was having on me. And that's really like the work that that therapist did for me, especially at first. Like they were really open. They really helped me to see like there's you have a pretty negative perception of self.
Hmm.
And the problem when you have a negative perception of self is it really limits your power. First accept yourself and then, change yourself. If you're always carrying the weight of like negative self-perception, if you're always dealing with the burden of self-hatred, then how can you expect yourself to improve? And how can you expect yourself to continue to grow? And I did like pretty basic like talk therapy, and it was very effective for me. I would say if you think like it would be effective for you, similar to the way you think a Whole30 diet or an exercise routine may be helpful for you, I would definitely consider checking it out. Definitely don't think it's something everybody has to do, but I think really confronting those negative feedback loops that I was feeding myself accelerated the changes that I was making in other parts of my life, which was really great. And yeah, that was really transformative for me. I don't know if the exercise part would have been as effective without the mental part, and I don't know, I would have done the mental part without the exercise part. But yeah, it was a very effective time.
Yeah, what I found throughout my life, I was working dead end jobs from the age of like 18 to, well, about 10 years, right? I was working warehouses and it's because I had absolutely zero self confidence in myself, really low self worth. I thought I was absolutely worthless. I didn't care about what I did. And I just wanted to work dead end jobs for the rest of my life that paid just enough to cover my rent and my bills, and until I died. And it was only when I met a friend, like my closest friend today, in my late 20s, where he said, like, why don't you try? There was this job, like a systems analyst role, and he said, why don't you go for this job? And I said, because I don't want to. I just want to kind of coast through life. And he persuaded me to do it, and I did it, and that's kind of what started my career acceleration. But it's only when you kind of achieve something like that, it's like a snowball. It's cyclical.
Mm-hmm.
You achieve something, and then you're like, oh, I do have worth, and then you kind of go for the next thing, and then you get more worth and more value. And uh, another book on my bookshelf, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. His first rule is I can't remember exactly how he words it, but it's the one about the lobsters. How he goes really granular detail about the lobsters, but basically he says walk like walk upright with your shoulders back and your chest out so that it portrays confidence. And then
Yeah.
other people perceive that you have confidence and therefore they treat you as if you do have confidence. And then because you're being treated like you have confidence, you become confident. It's that
Yep.
cyclical, ever growing thing. And I think that's, well, I mean, you can tell me, is that kind of what led to your career progression?
Yeah. I think so. I do think there's also like if people see you walking around, with your shoulders hunched and your head down, they're also not going to give you a lot of responsibility.
Hmm.
And I think that's kind of like the way that I live my life from basically at the time I was about 16 to the time that I was about 26. I had a lot of like, you know, naturally pretty intelligent person, relatively charming, like easy to get along with, but I just didn't really care about much of anything.
Yeah.
And that came across in how I lived. Like I remember I would just drive when I was a kid. I drove like, this is pretty common I would imagine for some kids, but like my median speed was like 110 miles an hour when I was driving the car. And like I just didn't care. Like it's not that I had this perception of like I'm trying to kill myself, but it was like I just don't care. Like I just like to drive fast. And that was like kind of like the way that I live my life for the first portion of it was like, hey, I'm just going to do what I want and I just don't really care the effect that it has on myself or anybody else because it was a matter of like self-interest. And you can imagine if you're a boss looking at someone who approaches the world that way, it doesn't matter how what else they do or what else they are. You're not going to give that person a lot of responsibility. You have to sort of provide care. And I think speaking to the confidence piece, I think that for myself, I the therapy helped to build confidence, and the confidence definitely brought a lot of opportunity. But I also think it starts from within. And I haven't read 12 Rules for Life, but I imagine Peterson does kind of address this of like, it's not just enough to like put your shoulders back and raise your chest and kind of walk this way. There also has to be that internal component of like, this is an honest projection. It's not just bravado. It's also,
Yeah.
hey, I do feel like I can do X, Y, and Z. And I imagine, that feeling that you experienced as your career accelerated was like this positive feedback loop of like, okay, if I try and then I have these aptitudes and I'm able to access them to positively benefit myself, that is really where the confidence comes from. And you can imagine as a boss, that's a great person to invest resources in, to invest opportunities in. Because if a person says, hey, I'm good enough, qualified enough, successful enough, I have this background of experience where I can sort of do X, Y, and Z, then also leadership opportunities could come along from that because that's a really great way to sort of train people up to think about themselves. So yeah, I do think it does start from within, but I do think the confidence plays a huge role in how you access opportunities and how you continue to sort of grow your opportunities.
This is going to sound random and like I'm taking a back step, but what kind of clothes were you wearing when you were like your heaviest?
Definitely not confidence clothes.
Yeah.
I just that so actually an interesting part of this whole thing is I always I when I one of the first things I did when I lost weight was part of like the self acceptance was buying clothes that were actually for my size because everything that I had was for like a size that I was like 2 or 3 years ago, which was a lot smaller than what I needed. So like, okay, no, you're this size, you're gonna buy these clothes. But I kept one shirt from that smaller size, and that's what I would do every week along with weighing myself. Would be putting on that shirt to kind of see like, okay, how am I going and how am I adjusting to the diets? Because sometimes you don't see what you want to see on the scale, but you put the shirt on, and you're like, oh, it's a little bit looser fitting.
Yeah.
And part of that's probably psychological. But yeah, I definitely had awful clothes, ill-fitting, torn, old, terrible clothes.
Yeah. I always found when I was overweight, I found it difficult to find the kind of clothes that portrayed confidence. So smart casual, like button down shirts, blazers, those kinds of things. I mean, you could wear like a full on suit, but I don't know. There was something about smart casual, okay? So just a button down shirt. I felt really self conscious when I was overweight because the gut really hangs over the belt. And when you kind of look up smart casual, they're all really slim guys, a bit
Yep.
buff. and it's like, oh man, I want to look like that. So I found that I was just wearing t-shirts, hoodies, jeans, and I'm wondering if that kind of plays a part
Oh
in
yeah.
it kind of intertwines the two, the internal and the external, from where I've lost a bit of weight, I've gained a bit of value, a bit more confidence. Oh, I feel a bit more confident, so now I can wear this outfit, and now I look more professional, and maybe that helps me in the kind of professional realm as well. Perhaps, I don't know.
I think I think you're spot on. I think talking about confidence, like being able to dress how you want, is a big thing. This might be a little TMI, but like when I was 400 pounds, I couldn't wash every part of my body. Like it was physically impossible. And I'm a huge smells guy. Like, I got to be smelling right, got to be smelling good. And so I didn't have that level of confidence in myself to be like, everything on me is scrubbed and clean, like,
Hmm.
and so there, that other piece of it as well is like, whenever you're able to sort of whenever you're able to sort of achieve the body that you want, it accelerates your confidence. It's like a multiplier in a video game or something like that. Like you're just able to sort of access specifically what you think you should be feeling of yourself and really boost that. And so, yeah, I completely agree. Whether it's clothes or hygiene or, even being able to like get in and out of a car without having to like heave and hoe, like if you go to a business meeting with someone and, you're sweating getting out of the car, that's gonna it 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 portrays you in a different light than someone who can't. And that's not to take anything away from you. And I want to be very clear to anybody who's watching this who is overweight. Like we're not here to dog on you. We're not here to say anything other than we've been there before. But I think like, there are, if you were thinking like, hey, maybe I could be doing a little bit better for myself, like absolutely. And I think confidence is a big piece of that.
I also think wearing the right size. So, but the opposite to what you were saying you were wearing sizes a couple sizes too small when you were overweight. But I think, again, I can only speak for myself. So when I was at my heaviest, I was wearing shirts like extra large because it was looser, so I felt like less self-conscious. But actually, you look at pictures when it was just hanging off you, and it looks way worse. Whereas you
Mm-hmm.
look at people who are still overweight, but they wear their size, or at least things that are a bit slim fitting,
Mm-hmm.
somehow looks. It sounds counterintuitive because you'd think it would make you look worse, but it actually still makes you look better somehow.
One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was tailors are some of the best value for money that you could ever find, especially if you have like a shirt that you really like or a pair of pants that you really like. There are tailors everywhere, and they're usually generally pretty inexpensive. And you can find like a really high quality tailor, take in some of your favorite, especially your business outfits, get them fitted to you. Like the reason why, someone who maybe is a little bit more overweight looks so good is because like they have an army of people pinning them and prodding them and poking them and needling them to like get those outfits look the way that they are. So even if your body is not exactly where you want it to be, another good way to like build confidence is to get a good tailor job done. And then, same with like a shoe shine or a shoe maintenance person. You could probably find someone pretty close to where you live who does a really good job cleaning and repairing shoes. If you have shoes that are, your everydays or your business meetings, like even if you're going into like a big business meeting with a client, you're flying somewhere or something, just get those shoes done up. You can have that a little bit of extra confidence there as well.
Yeah, definitely. So you were talking about how you had to go through two therapists until you found the right one, your third
Yep.
one. What was it that made the third one the right one?
I think finding a good therapist is similar. It's finding like a teacher that you really connect with, something like that, in that you feel like you can learn from them without being too pressured by them. My previous therapists, both were probably really good therapists. One of them was very like, read this book and, run through this program. And I think that probably works really well for some people. I didn't need a book or a program. Like, I just needed someone to talk to. And then the therapist before that was very like, they were a little bit more, again, like religiously oriented. And that
Right.
just didn't really work for me. So my third therapist was very much like academic, but also very approachable. There was just no pressure. And actually, one of my favorite things, like sometimes I can go on and on. At the end of the first session, she was like, okay, we're stopping here, and here's what we talked about, and here's what we're going to do for next week. And your number one thing is just to not think about this until next week. And it was this experience of like, oh, wow, like she invited me to get out of my head a little bit. And she confronted my ego in a really helpful way as well, where it was, we're going to build up the positives, but we're also not going to let you like focus on yourself too much. And so that was really helpful. I think from like a psychological perspective, what was really the most beneficial aspect of it was she found a way to kind of like break me down without tearing me down, and then she found a way to build me up, but not, the way that I was before. And I think that that's really like a good way of putting it. I think people can say like, oh, you're therapy pilled or stuff like that, and everybody needs different things. I had a friend who had a breakup. The person asked her to marry him in front of all of her friends and family, and then like broke up with her, dumped her for like a high school aged girl like 2 weeks later. And she went and like did therapy for it. And I was like, oh man, you need to go for like months and months. You might need to go for a couple years. And she's like, I did 3 sessions and I was fine. I was like, oh, cool, perfect. Like, I wish that was me. So that's like, when you find someone who really plays to your program, therapy really is like about you and what you think and how you feel. And then, but also encourages you to be better in that, and then kind of let it be what it needs to be for you.
Whenever I hear Americans talk about mental health, I always hear them talk about therapy and therapists, but never counseling. Do you have
Mm-hmm.
counseling over there?
What do you mean by counseling?
Okay, so
Or
over
what's the
here,
difference in your mind between counseling and
yeah.
therapists?
So for me, a therapist, I would assume it's something like more someone who's kind of telling you what to do. Whereas so I actually did a course of counseling. I got my level 2 certification in counseling, and the way counseling works is you're never supposed to give advice. You're supposed to hear, just listen, reframe what they've said, reword it, give it back to them so they get a different perspective. So basically the client is doing all the work and you're just kind of helping.
Yeah, I think so. Here, you have different. It's a little bit more of like a broad range. I would say like the therapist that I worked with was definitely doing more counseling
Oh, okay.
than telling. I would say, in terms of conversation in a session, it was probably like 40, probably between 35 or 30 and 35% her, and the rest of it was me.
Yeah.
And then I think here in America, like our dynamic is, do you do therapy, which is more counseling, or do you do like psychiatry, which is like the
Ah,
medical side of it?
right.
So, and I know that like, a counselor here also brings to mind like a lawyer. So that's probably why counsel is not used as much over here.
I'm just really interested in the differences between the US and the UK. Like, for
Yeah.
instance, you mentioned that your other therapists were really heavily
Yep.
religious, because
Yep.
that's obviously a huge difference.
Yeah.
Like, America is predominantly majority Christian, and over
Yep.
here, just we're probably mostly atheist or agnostic. To be honest, there's very few Christians over here, to my knowledge.
Yeah.
So the thought of a therapist tackling anything from a religious purview is boggling to me.
Yeah. It was an interesting experience. I would say the central issue, especially in certain like branches of American Christianity, is like sinfulness and the distance that creates between you and God. So if you think like, okay, depression is a consequence of sinfulness, then the question is like, how do you come out of the sinfulness and therefore the depression? I I was raised in a religious family.
Yeah.
I kind of understand what they were trying to do, but I think that for me it was fundamentally wrong. Like everything that I ever did wrong, I knew what I was doing. Like I didn't need like I'm the kind of person like I've read the Bible like multiple times. I know everything about like all of that sort of stuff. I didn't need a refresher course on what I was doing wrong. I needed someone to say like, okay, you're doing wrong kind of to yourself, and you need to kind of stop doing that as much. So the religious part just kind of reinforced what I already knew and was not very helpful. The other guy, I think he was, I don't know if he was definitely using more like, he was using fewer religious techniques. But yeah, it's so over here, like, a lot of people could call themselves therapists that aren't therapists. Like, so here you got life coaches, religious
Oh yeah.
counselors, therapists, psychiatrists. Like, you got all sorts of flavors. You can go to someone, Reiki healing. You can go get a massage. Like, it's all kind of clumped together. And obviously here in America, it's all about the dollar, right? So that's the thing, is like, what do we feel like could accelerate us along that path of either making more money or yeah. So I was fortunate. Actually, the therapist that I worked with, who I really liked, she was an older woman, but she was relatively new to therapy. So it was me and a bunch of like court ordered counseling stuff that she did. So she's like, I really
Uh,
like working with you because you're here of your own choice. Everybody else that I talk to, like, getting them to talk at all is really tough. So I don't know. It just kind of worked out that way, but it was a really good experience. And yeah, yeah. The differences between the UK and America are kind of funny to look at.
yeah. I had a guest on the other day who she's a spiritual healer, or at least in that realm, and it's not anything I'm into. But I
Yeah,
was like, I'm open to speaking to anyone,
yeah,
and we got into the whole Reiki and the tarot, and that was just a
yeah.
really interesting conversation. And obviously, I knew her answer as soon as I asked it, but I asked anyway. I was like, "Whereabouts in the US are you based?" And she said California, and I was like, "Yeah, I thought so."
Oh yeah,
So
yep.
you're in the Bay, right, San Fran?
I'm in the
So
Bay. Yeah. So originally from Colorado.
yeah,
So, but if you come out here, you feel like just certain vibes in the air. Like, it's a
yeah,
very weird place. Like, this is the home of Charles Manson and like a bunch of cults and stuff, and you can kind of understand. Like, it feels, California doesn't feel real. I One of my favorite podcasters says it's the end of America, like literally and spiritually. So like a lot of people come here and it's like, this is it. It's either you're in happy in LA, or this is the end of the road. So it creates a really interesting dynamic out here.
I don't think I could handle it. But again, maybe I'm seeing like a very biased view of it. But it looks a bit too radical for me. The kind of LA California piece. But you
Yep.
said you were raised religious, right? Does that mean you stepped away from it?
So I was raised in a very, like, I would call it like a fundamentalist Christian environment. We weren't like, all the way to the point where it was like a full blown cult or anything, but
Yeah.
like there was a really big thought. I don't know if these hit the UK like at all, but there was a really big book series here called Left Behind, which was all about how God was going to rapture Christians and engage in the apocalypse, like
Right.
engage the apocalypse, like start it off. And that was like a huge best-selling book series here. Movies they made, like, it's a huge entertainment franchise. And my church that I went to growing up, and my parents believed that to a T, very nearly. So everything was kind of understood in this context of like, oh, the apocalypse is about to happen, the Antichrist is about to come. So you always had to be like ready, like you always had to be ready for God to come and like snatch you away at any moment. So that, over time, like, I just, as I actually like read the Bible and started to talk to like other Christians with other beliefs, I was like, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. And that was, kind of like well regarded. And then over time I kind of like took a step back from the church in general. Here in America, I had a pretty an interesting experience where there was a pastor here who I had kind of like well regarded, and he was like, all of a sudden, before Trump got elected the first time, he was very much pro Trump. And I was like, oh, this is weird. Like, never really posted anything political ever before. And then after the election, the Trump organization made a donation of a fairly substantial amount to his ministry. And I was
Right.
just like, wow. Like, I was like, this is how the world works. I was
Yeah.
like, wow, this is crazy. Like, and I think it was kind of like the end of like this like childish perception of like, okay, at the end of the day, like, these are fundamentally good people trying to do fundamentally good things. And it's like, actually, there may be more playing there than you understand or are willing to realize. So say whatever you want to about the politics of it, like the experience of it was of religion was kind of, I don't like to say I'm a non-believer, because like I do in some senses still believe, but I would say like for me, like for me, it's a little bit more. It's definitely not as rigid as like my parents' stuff
Hmm.
was, and I think one thing that religion does is it gives you an experience like a mental escape from your life. I think a lot of people really want that, and a lot of people really need that. I don't need that as much anymore. So if I ever do, if I get hit by a car tomorrow and all of a sudden I'm a paraplegic, I might become like really religious or something. But at the end of the day, like it's just not that important to me at this point.
Yeah, I've been a very strong atheist like my whole life until I listened to some podcasts with quite like they're not religious podcasts, but sometimes they have guests on that are very strong Orthodox, so
Mm-hmm.
really old school
Mm-hmm.
Christianity, and I think the lessons behind it, the teachings behind it. Again, this goes back to Jordan Peterson. I think he's only recently turned to Christianity, but prior to that he wasn't. But everything he talks about is from the Bible purview. All of his life lessons are from the Bible, and I think that what I've come to appreciate in recent years is that I don't believe in it logistically. I don't believe that there is an all powerful, all knowing person in the sky who created everything and is always present. But I think that the teachings in the Bible, I've never read the Bible, but from what I've heard, there are some just good moral lessons for life there. So I kind of get it sometimes, but it's when, as you say, it's when they drill down into the specifics. I've heard Joe Rogan talk about this. He kind of did a bit on it where he said all political figures, like when they run for office in the US, they all talk about God and how we all believe in God. God this, God that. But can you imagine if one of them got up to the podium and said, "Right, we've tracked down Satan. We found out where Satan is. We found hell. We're going to send weapons of mass destruction to kill Satan." You'd think he's insane. But
Right.
but as you say, even in your kind of experience, there was a belief that this is literally going to happen. There is an antichrist. There is going to be a rapture. That's the bit that and that's the scary bit as well, where people believe that wholeheartedly, and then you move into the cult place where I can't remember the name of the cult, but the ones who thought that there was like a spaceship coming overhead and they all killed
Yeah.
themselves. It's scary, man. And the Westboro Baptist Church, that's
Mm-hmm.
just another level. People who just take
I
it too
think
far.
like it gives a good opportunity to examine the beliefs that you have and why you believe them because my experience with religion makes me a lot more skeptical of like apocalypses, like any sort of
Hmm.
apocalyptic event. I just kind of shrug off a little bit. People talk about, oh, there's going to be a climate crisis. Oh, there's going to be an economic crisis. Oh, there's going to be this. It's like, yes, there have been a lot of crises in the history of humanity, but we've kind of survived. And I think like fundamentally, like no matter what happens, you know, barring something that's completely beyond our imagination, like we are probably going to survive whatever happens next. And I think that also plays into like the therapy and the weight loss and the career stuff as well, which is a lot of people I think buy into religion because they lack a certain durability of their mental fortitude. So they kind of like buy into these like flights of fancy of like, oh, there is a little literal antichrist, or oh, these particular world events are playing directly into or against what I believe. And it helps, on a communitarian side, like you can get a bunch of friends if you believe what they believe.
Hmm.
And you can have, a bunch of really like powerful emotional experiences believing certain things. I know because I was there. Like I've had those experiences for myself. But at the end of the day, like what does that do to sort of push the world forward? What does it do to push humanity forward? I'm in America, so I'm a lot less kind of like worried about like the effects of it because if I was worried about it, I'd probably go crazy. But I think that there are a lot of like drawbacks that can be had from not really considering, not really critically thinking kind of how what you believe plays into the decisions that you make in any event. I don't know if you've ever read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman,
No.
but he makes a really good. He's a neuroscientist and a physicist and really smart guy. And he really looks at the way that like logic plays into the two parts of our brains. Like we have an alligator brain and a monkey brain
Hmm.
essentially, and those two tracks and the way that they bias each other, sort of this more instinctual self and the more logical self. Once you start kind of understanding like what you think and how you feel, you can sort of understand how other people think and how they feel, at least mechanically. in some senses. And that really gives you like the opportunity to appreciate, like my parents are still pretty religious. And I think a lot of it comes from the fact that the world changed a lot since they were kids to
Yeah.
today. And they don't know how to process that oftentimes. Like, transgender is not something that was like a big thing in the 80s. Like there were transgender people, but like that wasn't a social and cultural issue as much as it is today. The internet, like it must be terrifying. Like I think about my poor grandma, like born in 1928, and now she has an iPhone. Like I feel like I would just die, I hesitate to think, what I will believe when I'm their age, and I'm trying to navigate a world that's like, no, people don't own cars anymore. It's all robo taxis. Oh, people, it's all AR, VR. Like, are you gonna get the chip, Grandpa? Like, I don't know if I want to get the chip. Like that's the kind of, they'll be like, oh, why don't you want to get the chip? Well, it's some international conspiracy to steal all your identity and your data. They'll be like, oh, Grandpa, you're okay. That old Grandpa. But I think so there's a sense where you can kind of appreciate what they're feeling and what they're expressing. And then you have a politician like Trump come along who's basically like, actually, the America that you grew up in was the right one, and we're going to do everything we can to bring it back to that. And it's like, oh my God, like this is what I was waiting for. And I definitely, I don't really agree, but I can see why they think what they think. And the religion plays into that, I do believe. Actually, I have a question for you. And this is going to derail this conversation. So do you mind?
Sure, go ahead.
You're a car guy. So you said you had your dream car. What kind of car was it? And are any other dream cars on the horizon? I like cars too.
I'm not a car guy, so I don't know anything about cars. But my dream car was a Jaguar XE.
Ooh.
I mean, Jaguar, I suppose if my dream car, it'd probably be an XJ. But I got an XE because it was cheaper, obviously, a bit smaller. I just like it. So I've always had this image in my head of what success looks like. And it's an office job and a suit and a luxury car, a sedan, not a, what are they called? Saloon. We call it saloon, don't know what you call it over there. And yeah, it was, I mean, Audis, Beamers, those kind of things. But Jag was just like the next level up. I actually really wanted a Mercedes E-Class. I test drove this gorgeous E-Class that had the one digital display that like wraps around the whole cockpit, and that was amazing but too expensive, so I got the Jag. And this one in particular, like I was weighing up between two Jags. I had the Jag XE that I bought and the Jag XE R Sport, and the reason I went for the normal XE was because it had a metallic blue paint with chrome around the windows. So the R Sport was obviously superior in terms of driving speed and everything, performance, yeah. But the other one looked nicer and looked more professional. That's the one I went with. It had cream leather interior, which is just really old school, classic that I love. And like when you turn on the Jag and the little gear knob pops out and the vents open.
Fun.
Yeah, I love all that stuff.
Yeah, it's funny actually. We are very similar. I actually like a royal blue or a pearl blue with a white or cream interior as well.
Yes.
It's interesting because so in San Francisco we have self-driving cars that you can take like you would in Uber, and they're all Jaguars. So
nice.
Google bought a bunch of Jags to do all of the, and they're super comfortable. I was like, man, this is a nice car. But yeah, sorry, little bit of a tangent there. I always think little things like that are interesting to find out about folks. Like, hey, what's your dream car and why? I think that's kind of cool.
I've got a friend who's super into cars, and he's always talking about brake horsepower and torque, and I don't know what any of that means. But he bought a Audi, I think it's an S3. He wanted the RS3, but it was too expensive, so he got an S3. And, he's always talking about how fast it can go, and I'm like, doesn't look as nice as my Jag, though. That's all.
Is Jag originally British?
Yeah.
Cool. That's cool. I like that.
I always wanted a BMW, but now I've actually got one, but it's only a 2 Series, and I hate it. I don't know why I pictured it was the executive car, right? A 3 Series, 5 Series, and then I got a 2 Series for my wife, and now I ended up with it. But they always said that the iDrive is like the superior infotainment system. And I disagree. I just don't like it. I preferred the Jag. I even like the Volkswagen one, where it's just simple touchscreen. It's like my music's
Yep.
there, my sat nav's there. You don't have this
Yep.
little dial.
Keep it simple. Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't like dials. I don't love the
no.
dials. Either give me buttons or give me touchscreen.
Did you say what you drive?
I actually don't have a car right now. I work for a car company, which is kind of funny, but I live in a city where like if you need to go somewhere, you take a Waymo or you take the bus and or you take the train. So I also don't have a parking space at our current apartment in San Francisco. Your car will get broken into fairly frequently. So
Oh,
best
brilliant.
to go carless. So currently I'm saving up that money into an account and I'll have a very nice car one day. I use Turo, which is an app they have here where you can rent cars. So if we need to go out of town for the weekend or whatever, we'll get a nice, Mercedes or BMW. Don't see as many Jags over here
No.
as I would expect, but yeah, it's it's a good time.
But you've got cars that we don't have access to, like Chevrolet, Cadillac. I don't
Oh,
know what else.
Cadillacs? Oh
No,
man,
man,
I don't know if you guys
that's an
need
American
Cadillacs.
car.
Cadillacs, yeah, Cadillacs. It is very gaudy cars. I work in the electric vehicle world, and they just came out with an electric Escalade, and I think the thing weighs like 4,500 pounds, and it's huge.
Jesus.
It's like a submarine. So it's ridiculous. Like American cars are all about being able to just be the biggest
Yeah.
and least classy in some senses that you can possibly be. So
In recent years, like past 5 years, I'd say, we've had a surge in pickup trucks. We're getting a
oh
lot
really?
of pickup trucks now, but probably not even as big as like a US one. I see a lot of Ford
Yeah.
Rangers over here, which is probably considered really small for you.
They don't even sell the Rangers here anymore, pretty much, and people hate it. But it's a perfect like entry level pickup. I had a buddy who had a Ranger, and we loved that car because it's perfect size. Like it's not, especially for like a city. Like, there's nothing worse in Denver. When I worked there, there's a lot of oil people in Denver, and you can always tell an oil person because they have this really tricked out giant truck. And you can imagine in a city, trying to park next to somebody who's taking up like 2.5 parking spaces with their biggest truck. You're not very happy about that. But a Ranger's perfect. Like I love the Ranger, yeah. But they don't really sell them here because they want people to buy like the F-150, which is like your standard sized truck. That's like our biggest truck here, and then whatever the Dodge version and all the different stuff. But yeah, I imagine you guys have a lot of cool Japanese trucks too. I also know I don't know if BYD sells in the UK, but
No.
their Shark or whatever is supposed to be really cool. Their electric pickup.
Yeah, I see a lot of Teslas, which obviously you're probably going to have over there as well, probably
Yeah,
more than we do. Um,
yeah,
they look nice. I've heard they've got a lot of faults. They they're pretty expensive, but
yeah.
that's the way we're going. It's electric cars, but I just don't have a way to charge it. So
So I actually work for Tesla.
oh, okay.
I do battery recycling for them, which is pretty fun. And they're a lot of the electric cars are really great, but they haven't really figured out how to make them cheaply, except for in China. So that's it's gonna be interesting to see. I think the next 5 to 10 years is gonna be a lot of change in the electric vehicle world. But yeah, electric is really great. I think it's great, except for the charging piece, which is a little tricky to figure out because it takes like 20 minutes to charge a car from like 20% to 80%, which is about the range you're supposed to keep it in.
Oh,
So you can sit there for a while, but yeah.
that's quicker than I was expecting. So you work for Tesla and you live in San Francisco.
Yep.
Does that cause any conflict in your life?
No, I mean it's kind of funny, right? Because like there's a lot of Tesla actually started like their first factory was in the Bay, so it's a very like until recently it was a very like California centric company. Our biggest
Yeah.
market is California by like a long shot.
It's only since
I
the
think.
election that Tesla
Oh
became
yeah,
evil.
yeah, and I mean people are not happy about it, but
Yeah.
being in the Bay, you're in like the tech central,
Yeah.
and it is very like more progressive, liberal. But you still see plenty of Cybertrucks driving around because that's what a lot of the tech people drive. You still see plenty of Teslas because that's what everybody here drives. But yeah, there's a lot of like pushback against what Elon has done globally. But they always say when we're in our meetings and stuff, they'll say we're not really going to offer comment about what Elon does at his time when he's not working. And so I give similar feedback of like, what Elon does when he's not working is not really like we don't even have to think about that and may get laid off one day, but who knows what's going to happen with the company. We One thing I've learned since working at Tesla is the stock market and the value of a company really tied to like the expectation of future value more than it is present value, which kind of makes sense. But a lot of that comes down to how well the CEO can play the salesman. And Elon is probably the best salesman in the history of the world. Hate him or love him, or both, given on the week, the day, of the year. He's good at getting people to buy into a future that he plans to build. So
Okay, it's good that it's not as conflictive as I see, but that's the thing with social media, right? It's an echo chamber. You only see the best of something or the worst of something. So as soon as the only social media I was ever on was a Reddit, and I'm off it now, apart from for the purposes of the podcast. But as soon as the election happened, and Elon did what he did at the inauguration, all you saw on Reddit, because Reddit is a very left-leaning platform, all you saw was every subreddit saying, "We will not. You cannot post X here anymore because we hate Nazis." I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole on that, but that's all I saw, right? All I saw was, we hate Elon, we hate Tesla. You saw these people like vandalizing innocent people's cars, putting swastikas on them. It's just like, when you're putting swastikas on vehicles, that's kind of counterintuitive to your message, but fine. But it's good to hear that it's not actually that bad all the time.
I think like in regards to a lot of the stuff that we've seen, you know, one of the things that's interesting about America, and I'm sure the UK in a sense, is like there's not a lot of direct democracy. Like one person doesn't get to do much to move the needle. So when people feel as though they are losing power, they're going to act out. A very famous case of that is Luigi Mangione and the execution of the CEO of United Health. Someone who feels like, hey, the system has abandoned the people, rightly or wrongly, whatever, people can feel about that, so I'm going to commit an act of violence. And obviously it's different being from where I am, like in having to literally experience, increased security measures and stuff like that, given what I do in the company that I work for. But that being said, there's also this element of like, what do we expect to happen to ourselves? And I had a very honest conversation with myself in terms of being like, okay, so your values are not all the way aligned here. You're in a position where you could be put into danger. Like, is this really what you want to do?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like, the answer is yes. Like, I do believe that what we're doing at Tesla is a good thing. I also know enough, I've like talked to enough CEOs to know like Elon is not necessarily alone in a lot of his commentary and a lot of his opinions, but the reaction is going to be very public because his company is so successful. And again, it's kind of like this weird frame of reference when you're working at Tesla. Like at other companies I worked for, I was lucky if I could pitch $20 million to $60 million in business a year. My background is more in programs and projects. So new business, CapEx projects, all that good stuff. I'd be really lucky if I could get to that number. At Tesla, unless your project is like 200 million or above, good luck getting like IT support for what you're doing. Good luck getting like, a business process set up, because everything is a billion, like the $1 billion businesses, we have like 4 or 5 of those. And so it takes a lot of energy and effort to keep those going. So you're not going to get play for your smaller project. So when you all of a sudden, like, your boss's, my boss's 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 boss is in the news every day, and the product that I contribute to is getting destroyed as part of like a political protest, it almost feels natural in this environment where it's like you work for a $1 trillion company. They do make like public facing products. And as much as I don't necessarily agree with everything that has happened, I also, it's like living in a fantasy in some senses.
Is that the reason you moved from Colorado then?
I actually was living in Arizona for a couple years before this, and then I moved up here actually for another job that I got laid off of, and then I picked this job up after that. And working in tech, especially, you're going to get added and cut just depending on the different needs. I was working for a startup previously, and then I started my own startup, and then I went to work for Tesla as well.
Yeah, I work in tech and got made redundant this time last year because they just do an annual cull
Hmm.
of like 200 staff because they go around hoovering up startups and then they realize we've got 10 people with the same job title. We only need one, so sack the other nine.
Yeah.
I keep telling that story, the reason that was made redundant, and everyone's saying, yeah, there's a lot of that going around.
I think it's just a part of the culture now.
Yeah.
It is what it is. And working in Silicon Valley, being here physically is a little bit different because I think the
Hmm.
unemployment rate here is like 1%. So you can find stuff if you get laid off. But yeah, I imagine it can be hard other places. I
Yeah.
also think like this is a great time for builders. I know there's lots of like uncertainty in the market with stuff coming on with like AI and stuff. I think, we need more like creative solutions for a lot of the products that we're seeing. A lot of it's like big tech now, which is fine, but the next generation of whatever this looks like is probably not going to be built by like Facebook. It's going to be built by people who are more creative and more agile and who can leverage some of these tools that are being developed like the LLMs and the AI and even like robo taxis and stuff and take them kind of like to the next level. That's
Yeah.
that's my opinion.
So what were you doing prior to tech?
Prior to tech, I've always been in like project management. So when I was kind of starting my career, I underperformed where I thought that I was supposed to be because I mostly stuck to like the nonprofit sector. So being from a religious background, that's a pretty easy way to like, get into working in, managing a charity or something like that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like what I did. I didn't really manage, but I helped assisted with management. I was good at it, but I wasn't really fulfilled by it. And my my finances were really bad because I wasn't getting paid enough because I was working for a nonprofit. And I was at a point in my career where I hadn't finished school because I was paying for it kind of like piecemeal.
Yeah.
And so when I started to kind of like lose weight, like the next thing that really came along was like finishing my education.
Right.
And so I did this thing where I like begged my way into this logistics coordinator role when I was like 26 and everybody that I was working with was like 21. But what I did was it was such an easy job that I was able to basically do college and finish my degree while I was also doing this job. I was able to really succeed and excel. And then COVID hit and everything went home. And I was like, great, this is perfect. I'm going to get a master's degree. Like, while everybody's just sitting at home, like not doing anything, I want to do something to try to like make up some time. And so I did a master's and went in. That's when I started getting more into like project management. And I've always worked around tech. So my first like project manager or my logistics coordinator and then eventually accounts coordinator role was with a 3D printing company, the biggest one
Hmm.
in the world. That was really cool being able to see kind of how that works. And then also, I learned a lot about business. You learn a lot about international shipping and account management and working with different kinds of people and even leveraging something as simple as like how do you get FedEx to move a package when they say they don't want to move a package, like all these different things and skills that you learn kind of on that level. And then from there, I got into project management. I went to there's advanced surgery centers in Arizona. They have a lot of old people in Arizona and a lot of vision problems because there's so much sun. So a lot of like advanced vision surgeries happen in Arizona, and a lot of development of that tech happens in Arizona. So my first kind of like project manager role was pitching and building surgery centers out in Arizona for vision people. And then once I got out of that, I went more to a tech side. So I worked for a startup that did they basically would like go to your house and deliver gas to your house. They would fill up your car like overnight or whatever, and that was an interesting experience. I saw how not to run a business. No offense to anybody, any of my friends still working there, but we launched in like 4 markets and had no business worked up. So I helped launch those markets and then got laid off and they exited all those markets and it was like, okay, everything on my end was handled. Unfortunately, on the sales side, it was not as well handled. And then that's when I started my own company, which we built an app for the Apple Vision Pro. If you're familiar, I don't know if you've ever used that before, or
No.
if it's sold in the UK, but it's Apple's AR VR headset.
Oh yeah, I've seen videos
So
of people walking around the streets in the
yeah,
States wearing
it's
those
actually I
things.
have it right here. It's in this little package.
Oh, okay,
It's
yeah.
it's really cool, and we built. It's an interesting experience. Looking at like personal financial management. Obviously, a lot of it's handled even in apps similar to the way it's handled in Excel. So we wanted to make it a little bit more playful. So we made an app that treats it like Legos. So you can kind of like visually like take an element and like, okay, I have like $1 here, so I'm going to put it in here, and that turns it into like a little Lego piece. And then you can kind of build out your little budget. So that was cool. We kind of picked up some users there. And then we just launched an app called Level Up, which helps folks find a job using some of the principles that I learned over my career. So that's been fun. And then the Tesla thing kind of popped up out of nowhere. I had a buddy who was looking for some logistics support at Tesla. And he was like, "Yeah, you have a background in logistics and you need a job." And then I got in and it was actually for battery recycling, which is pretty crazy, a very like new world. And so we scaled the business from like 5 million to like 60 in a year. And so this year we're going for like 120. So it's fun. It's a, a lot of international work. It's a lot of different things, but yeah, it's I would say like for folks, if you're thinking that you're behind in your career, that's really just a matter of perception.
Hmm.
There are so many doors that are open to folks. What you need to do is you need to get your certificates, you need to get a degree, and you just knock on doors until someone lets you in. If you're not making enough money, that's the best sign to find a new job. Go find a new job that pays you what you think you deserve to be paid. And if you don't know what you deserve to be paid, you need to research on the internet what you deserve to be paid.
Yeah.
You need to figure that out for yourself. That's the number one thing that you owe yourself. You don't have to feel all this financial stress all the time. You don't have to feel all this financial pressure. And look, I know I'm coming from a place where I'm well educated. I'm a white guy in America. I'm in Silicon Valley. I get it. I hear you saying I can't do it, but I wasn't this person for forever.
Yeah.
I think anybody can go out and achieve a little bit more for themselves. And like you were saying before, like the world wants somebody. Part of confidence is knowing what you want. And so, really throwing your chest back and saying, "This is what I think I deserve," is really going to give folks an opportunity to measure up to what you think you deserve for yourself.
Cool. While we're on the topic of your kind of career journey, and you mentioned a couple things, apps and businesses that you've done yourself, is there anything that you'd like to plug while you're on?
Yeah, absolutely. Brand new app in the App Store. We look at your income, we look where you live in the world, and we make our assessment of what you should be making. Usually it's 10 to 20% more. And then we're going to serve you the jobs that are going to get you that. So swipe left if you don't like a job, swipe right if you want to apply. And then we have an AI tool which will automatically craft your resume for that. It gives you the opportunity to get a leg up against all the competition. AI are the people who are screening you. So we developed a system that can talk to them. We also developed a system that can help with high volume of applications and resumes. So yeah, go ahead and check that out. Level Up, Grow Your Income in the App Store. And then a book that I would suggest everybody reads is Stumbling Upon Happiness. It's by a neuroscientist who studied happiness. I found that book incredibly helpful to understand my brain, especially as I was coming out of a depression. Stumbling Upon Happiness, the biggest takeaway that I had is that your brain, with emotional pain, is similar to your body with other pain. It's actually designed to heal. So if you give yourself a chance to do better, to rest, to take time, your brain will heal your emotional wounds in a similar way that your body will heal your physical wounds. So Stumbling Upon Happiness, check that out.
Cool. That AI thing sounds perfect for where I'm at the moment. The problem I've got is this ATS. Like I craft my CV, I spend ages on it, and then it's like, oh, the ATS doesn't like it. So you've got to craft it just to get through the ATS so a person can actually read it. So I'm definitely going to check out that app.
Appreciate it.
I've got a list of questions that I kind of cherry pick a couple that I ask each guest. So for you, first off, how do you define success?
I think success is the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is self-actualization. So feeling comfortable and accepting of who you are and what you're doing, while also striving to improve yourself and feeling all of the good feelings that comes from that.
Perfect. Secondly, what's a habit that you've developed that has had the most positive impact on your life?
The habit that I do the most that's had the most positive impact, there's a few of them. I think the primary thing would be the habit of what I would call like double stacking your time. the world will tell you you really need to focus on one task when actually you can focus on probably 2 or 3 tasks in a certain window of time. And that's going to give you the opportunity to live the 2 or 3 lives that you may need to live in order to be a successful person. So, for instance, right now I am working and starting a really successful business within Tesla, and then I'm also starting a successful business for myself. So, learning how to stack those tasks and really approaching your schedule in terms of, hey, I need to be 2 people, but I only have one person's amount of time. So, how can I manage that? That what I would say is the most important thing.
And how do you do that?
The way you do it is being a little bit selfish. I'll be honest. I got a college degree on one company's time, and I'm starting a business on another's. No, I'm kidding. But you really have to look at it like, hey, if I only have like one person's lifetime to live, but I know that I want to accomplish more than the average person does, how am I going to find those little times in my day where I can do what I need to do? And part of it is, understanding what you're trying to accomplish in terms of a series of tasks. So, for instance, something as simple as a assignment list for school, or a reading list if you're trying to develop a new skill, or a workout routine if you're trying to get more fit. And then really plotting and saying, okay, I have 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there. What can I do to fill this time? Don't give yourself, too much free time in terms of on the weekends or different things like that. But then also understand, the need for rest and kind of bake that in as well. But yeah, be selfish as much as is appropriate. Be focused as much as you can, and then take care of yourself and understand your tasks.
It doesn't sound too dissimilar to what I've only just started doing, where I realized that so we've all got the same 24 hours in a day, and 8 hours of those should be spent sleeping, and 8 hours of them must be spent working typically, and the other 8 hours are up to you. And most people spend those, as you say, that's their free time, and it's unfortunately spent for most people sitting watching Netflix. And at weekends, it's whole days just wasted. And I think it was Alex Hormozy that I heard on Modern Wisdom who said you should use that third 8 hours to work on your passion. And that's what I'm doing now. Like, it's going to take years and years and decades, but eventually if you commit to your passion for those final 8 hours, after enough time, you can replace the 8 hours you spent working for someone else. Yep. And replace it with what you really want to do.
If you're comfortable in your life, you make enough money, you go watch as much football as you want to. I'm not here to say that everybody should do what I do, but what I am here to say is if you want more, you have to act more. You have to contribute more. And at the end of the day, like, there's just really no substitution for hard work. And everybody, needs luck to be successful. I definitely don't want to discount that. But hard work is essentially the preparation for luck. So if your hard work looks like sitting on the couch watching Netflix, when your luck comes, you're probably not going to be able to take it as much of an opportunity as if you had been working for that. But
yeah. Final question. What does the perfect version of you look like?
Oh, that's a hard question to answer for me, because I think that I'm really limited by my own imagination in a lot of senses. The perfect version of me today looks like this, doing this podcast with you. Going forward, I think I need to grow in terms of like my personality, being kinder. Sometimes I can be a little bit more brash, a little bit more, a little bit less sensitive to what other folks think. So I think I need to kind of grow in that a little bit. I think I need to grow in terms of how to manage my time more effectively to reach my goals. But I would say, if you're trying to find that perfect version of yourself, that's something that is probably not going to look like what you think it is. And that's not to say that you shouldn't pursue all that you can be, but rather that, embrace the perfection that you are now, and then continue to progress towards perfection in the future. And I know that sounds like super embrace yourself as you are. It's like, no, there's an impetus to grow. You already know what you need to do to grow. Embrace who you are now, and then leverage that to continue on in the future. That's how I see my perfect self.
Cool. Well, that wraps it up. Thank you very much for coming on, sharing your story, being so open.
Yep. Thank you for the time.
Can't fake forever. Rage against the screen.